Welcome to UNCAGED. Today we're speaking with Bassel Hamwi. Bassel has an incredible background, but he's very focused on CEO executive coaching. Right now, he's a big believer in championing the idea of executive coaching. And so we're going to spend a good chunk of today talking about that. He's worn many, many other hats, and I'm sure that we'll get into that when we go through the first couple of questions with him. But Bassel, it's great to have you on the program. And with that in mind, tell us a little bit about you and your career.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I basically started my career at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where I was really involved in trying to create and build new institutions. That was a fabulous process, and I got very lucky because I was involved in creating some of the institutions that really grew and prospered throughout the world and mostly in the Middle East. So I was involved in the writing of the private banking law in Syria and creating the first private bank there in the year 2000. This went on to become IFC's first investment or best investment in the Middle East to date. So they've generated a very strong IRR from it. And a few years later, I was headhunted to start a bank on my own with a major banking group from Lebanon. That bank, Bank Audi Syria, grew in 5 years to be 4% of GDP. So we just hit it out of the ballpark. And it was an incredible experience to see the country open up and to be involved in the creation of an institution that was the premier, in everything. It was
the foundational element for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this was my first experience to be an entrepreneur developer because I was a shareholder in the bank as well as its CEO. And as a very young executive at 38, running a major institution, I must tell you, it felt wonderful. At the same time, it felt extremely lonely. There really is no one to share issues with. So as a CEO, it's very difficult to talk about your board problems to your board. You cannot talk to your subordinates. I had a hard time speaking to my friends about issues related to what I was going through. And, working 18 hours a week meant that the family wasn't seeing me. I couldn't talk to them about my issues.
Yeah.
So this is kind of when the first time I felt that I wish I had a coach. I experimented with 2 coaches. It didn't work out the way I wanted. I got some great tips, but it never really took off the way that I expected. And I really thought that the problem was, with me not being a very coachable young CEO. With time and now with having the benefit of almost 20 years later, I must say that it's actually coaching has developed to become a lot more of a science than just an art. And we have a lot of metrics and there is a lot of certification, which really means that we're beginning to understand in a much clearer way the impact that coaching has on CEOs and their performance.
Yeah, I actually was having a conversation earlier today about executive coaching in general. And it was really an interesting one because I think of my own experiences. Before I kind of set off on an entrepreneurial track, I worked for Fortune 500 companies.
Right.
And coaching in my worlds that I was part of at the time, this is back in the day now, was almost like a weapon of HR in a way. And it was like, if you were given a coach, it usually meant maybe there were problems with you. Maybe you might be being coached out of the business, right? It's almost like if you were given a coach, you probably went home that night and polished up your resume. But somewhere along the way, I can't pinpoint the date, maybe like late 2000s, 2008, 2009, things started to dramatically shift. And not only was it like not a bad thing, but it was like, you don't have a coach? Really? And you're a CEO and you're leading a company, you don't have a coach? Like, what are you doing? It suddenly became one of these things where the people that were really crushing it we're doing it. And that's, I think, a fascinating shift. So, I mean, with that kind of statement, let's get into Hamwi Consult. So, you are the founder of Hamwi Consult. You guys do CEO coaching. Tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started by looking at the effect that coaching has on performance. And no matter how you look at it from the different independent studies and consulting houses, it's between 500 and 700% payback on every dollar that you spend. And it's so pivotal. And obviously, the better the fit between the coach and the coachee, the better defined the statement. Obviously, the performance gets a lot better. So for us at Hamwi Consult, we focus on three things. They're all leadership based, and this is just because of the career that I've had. After running the bank in Syria, I also started the Syrian Stock Exchange, the Damascus Securities Exchange, which is the first stock market in the country, and the first investment bank, which I chaired, as well as the first insurance company. And Syria was at an explosive phase in a very positive way. It was just growing tremendously. GDP growth was very, very high. And, it was just becoming kind of like the success poster of the Middle East economically.
Yeah.
Then came the Arab Spring, and with it came the Syrian civil war, which really destroyed everything.
Yeah.
And running the bank at a time of growth, rapid growth, to become $2 billion in size from really 50 million was tremendous. And, I got to understand how to run and how to manage a business that is in rapid growth. And it's the one that has, as a bank, we're deposit taking, we're heavily regulated, and we're also listed on the stock exchange. So I had to balance all of the different rights and obligations of everyone.
Yeah.
So running a business in that sense and looking at whenever we made a mistake, that mistake would scale so fast because of the rapid growth.
Yeah.
So obviously the successes are great, and we can talk about success as much as we like, but also making sure that we manage the risks and we mitigate them. So just looking at how mistakes would scale and how to put the genie back in the box was so difficult. So that's an area that I'm really interested in. So really coaching CEOs that are involved in rapid growth businesses.
Rapid growth businesses are very, very exciting, and I would say that have their own set of wonderful challenges.
Right.
I mean, obviously, we've all seen what happened with OpenAI, which is probably a great example of what you're talking about, which is, I mean, I don't know if that's certainly not a good example of what perhaps we'd want to see, but certainly an example of the challenges. But when you think about the groups and the individuals that you're coaching now, CEOs that you're coaching, what's top of mind for them right now?
They generally fall into one of two categories: really rapid growth. And the rapid growth is how do I make sure that I get everything done right? How do I make sure that my employees continue to be incentivized and they don't look elsewhere? How do I make sure that my board is functioning in a way that I would like it to function? The board is on my side. And the OpenAI example probably is one of the best that we can see in that sense. And then how do I make sure that I continue to grow? Because there is such fierce competition that, I could become extinct fairly quickly, even in a rapid growth environment. So I have to remain relevant. And how do I do this as a human being? I mean, if you cut beyond all of this, the kind of weight that rests on the CEO's shoulder is so heavy. It's like, how do I make it and still smile, still be able to take the vacation with the kids and enjoy it, still be able to disconnect when I can, So in our approach, we try to bring a holistic approach to coaching that isn't concerned only with the numbers, but also concerned with how to make sure that it is sustainable for you as a CEO.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. If you're a CEO, you've probably had that moment in your life where you feel like you're operating at like maximum capability or fulfilled. Like there's these glimmers, these moments. But what you're hitting on is, I think, even more important, which is how do you make that sustainable? There, right? How do you keep it going?
Yeah,
And I mean, that I think is the real challenge for folks. And how do you make it kind of almost ritualistic in a way, how
yeah,
you go about everything you do to maintain that kind of steady level?
yeah,
People always throw out words like balance, etc. But I mean, any leader really knows like life is not a smooth ride. There's no
yeah,
smooth
absolutely.
ride, right? I mean, Bassel, I'm talking to a guy who set up the Serious Stock Exchange. I mean, there's no way that was an easy ride,
For
right?
sure,
I
man.
mean,
For
right?
sure.
So you're going to have a roller coaster a bit,
Yeah,
right? How do you manage that? How do you manage yourself in that and keep that perspective? I think that's a wonderful perspective that you're bringing to the table here.
yeah.
But let me kind of shift gears a little bit because
Sure.
done so much. You've done some really, really challenging work and things that are, I would say, critical for the world. It's a shame that things like the Syria situation imploded like it did, but certainly that work is fundamental for any society to get to the next level for sure. But, now that you're working with CEOs, and you mentioned also to me that you work with
Yeah.
some family business consulting, what drives your passion for that?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard of the concept of flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as CEOs, we never really have flow because we walk into work and our day is constant interruptions and firefighting and challenges and strategy setting and mentoring. And the idea of doing something where it's purely just us, a space that's reserved for us to do something that we're passionate about and to do it kind of soulfully begins to
Mm-hmm.
evaporate.
Yeah.
For me, I got my flow as a CEO when I started coaching.
Mm.
So when I sit with a coachee and we're talking, I lose myself in the moment. I am
Yeah.
able to sort of really transport myself to another universe where my sole preoccupation is becoming a thinking partner for the CEO and trying
Yeah.
to understand their priorities and putting myself in their shoes and figuring out with their value system what is important and how I can help answer some of the questions they have and question some of the um, ideas they have to bring them
Yeah.
to a place where they can move forward.
That's great. I mean, I think it's such a valuable skill that you found that you have, and also kind of something that I would say all leaders need. I would say these accelerated growth companies that you work with a lot, it's funny. I think that it's hard for them to pause sometimes and reflect. And I think
Yeah,
probably one of the greatest things that you could do is just give them that moment,
for
that
sure,
moment to,
sure.
hey, stop for a second and let's go through this a little bit.
And it's
But
also hard on the way down as well. I mean, so
mm,
you have the companies that are in massive growth, but we live in a very turbulent environment. And, if you look at fantastic companies, take Apple, for example, at one point it wasn't doing so well, right?
yeah.
So the idea
People
is,
somehow have forgotten that. I remember when Gates, bailed them out.
yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah. So how do you react to, severe market downturns, right? We're looking at the health industry. We're looking at a number of other industries where things are really difficult. And you, as a leader, where do you go to? How do you navigate this process? And for better or for worse, I navigated the bank on the way up. But I also had to navigate it on the way down.
right.
Because in 2011, when the Syrian civil war happened, the whole of the dollar, so our main foreign currency, was sanctioned, and
Yeah,
we had a bank run, right? Like most of the banks had bank runs,
yeah,
and suffering through a bank run in a civil war environment is actually pretty difficult. And
yeah,
mitigating that and what goes into it from the psychology, what goes into it from the strategic, asset and liability matching, what goes into it from relationship with the regulator and other banks. It's just like so complicated. But
yeah,
having done it, it's just I probably learned more during the first 6 months of the Civil War than I had in 6 years of running the bank before. So
yeah.
that's really valuable, I think. And it's kind of rare to, I wish I had somebody like me at the time just to sort of like knock some sense into me and say, hey, you can do this and you can do that. And survival, not only is it possible, it is very likely.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. I think when we think of companies growing, that's a can be a stressful time for sure, but it's a positive time ultimately. It's something that everyone's excited about. But we do live in an economic moment which is turbulent, right? I mean, and a global moment that's turbulent. And so how CEOs are handling that, how they're balancing those issues is really, really hard. And obviously, advising and providing them structures and foundations to build on to deal with that stuff is absolutely key. But I mean, things are not slowing down, Basil. We're going into 2024. Feel like I'm driving about 150 miles an hour right now. Tell me a little bit more about what you see, in our near future.
Yeah, it's obviously a very turbulent environment, like you said, Bans. And coming out of COVID, we're seeing that the future is extremely unpredictable. I mean, and we don't know where to go really from here. There are a few things that I would hold as kind of rules for the road for the coming 2, 3 years. And the first one is making sure that we are at the top of our game in terms of training, in
Hmm.
terms of knowledge. So whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's AI or whether it's any type of understanding our environment, I think this is the time more than other times where we need to make sure that our education and our learning is really up to snuff.
Yeah.
And that's where I recommend for all of my clients to make sure that they're taking executive courses and undergoing some form of training that they are passionate about in something
Yeah.
that they like. And the broader the better, right? And the more numerous, even if you have to take 2, 3 weeks off a year just to make sure that you're at the top of your game in terms of training, because things are so unpredictable, you don't know what the future will hold.
Yeah.
The
I love
second
that.
part is this idea of how do you make sure that you have sufficient happiness and well-being in your life? This is really a big deal. Like when we're looking at the whole question of happiness, what is it and how to get it, we have become a lot more scientific. And this is Harvard doing the research and University of Pennsylvania doing the research and others. And we've discovered that happiness is not something that you stumble upon. Happiness is actually a skill. It's a skill that we can work on and get to and become happier as we age.
Mm.
That has now a number of elements that are well known. So it's no longer such a big mystery. We just need to unravel what these elements are and make sure that we implement them, in our lives in a constant way. And the
Yeah.
third, and I think perhaps a very, one of the most important ones, is to really have a passion that goes beyond the day to day.
Hmm.
And for me, it's really to be in the service of others. And as we look at how we become happy as individuals, and the research on this is also very, very clear. When we do things for ourselves, when we pamper ourselves, when we take care of ourselves, you get a lot of return on this. But the best return we actually get is when we do this for others.
Mm.
And this has been now proven in one study after the other. And having that in my life for me is really important, becoming some part of something larger than myself. And
Yeah.
I've discovered that invariably all of my clients, whenever they feel connected to something bigger, they actually end up feeling happier, they are more productive, and they're just, they're a better version of themselves, which
Yeah.
is really what all of them want to become.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, this is really, really good counsel. Certainly, I would say that today, with everything changing so quickly, this type of advice and some of these areas of focus that you highlighted really resonate. We need to make sure that we can find a way to happiness for all of us, as well as keeping going and making sure the companies are successful. Basil, if someone wanted to learn more about what you're working on at Hamwi Consult, where's the best place to reach you?
It's really easy. I'm on LinkedIn, and we have a website, www.hamweconsult.com, and very much available. I don't take a lot of clients, but I do have a lot of conversations with people who are seeking coaching. So I match a lot of my friends and colleagues with coaches that I think would be of benefit to them. So it's really the idea about improving the world that we live in,
Yeah.
and I do that a lot.
I love that. Well, Bassel, thank you so much for being on the Uncaged show today. We've been speaking with Bassel Hamwi. He is the CEO of Hamwi Consult. Hamwi Consult focuses on CEO coaching, championing executive coaching in general. It also offers family business consulting, which I didn't get into, Bassel, but man, that's a topic I think for another show. It's a great,
Absolutely.
great topic. And certainly, it's a moment where we're seeing leaders really needing an ability to discuss some of the challenges that they face. And I do think that there's an openness really across the younger generations that they all want to improve. They all want to
Yeah,
find new ways. They want
very
to
true.
max out. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot more science to this stuff today and finding ways to apply that. So, Bassel, thank you so much for being on the show, and we look forward to having you back.
Bant, what a pleasure. Really, thank you so much. Thank you for hosting and hope to see you again soon.
Cheers.